G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a SunFoil update. First thing I want to get onto is the SunFoil diesel experiment. So here we have a photocopy of the fuel log of my son's Holden Rodeo turbocharged intercooled diesel with a 30 watt gallium arsenide panel on it. It starts in November when he bought the thing, and by the look of that first figure, the dealer has had all the cars in the yard on a 3-day rotation where every third night the battery goes on a trickle charge, because the longer the boy had the car, the worse its fuel consumption became, and it's pretty difficult to expect anybody to make sense of those figures, so I think we'll go on to a graph. But before we get there, the SunFoil was fitted 7 months, 8 months after he bought the car, and then he didn't actually connect it for 6 weeks or so after he fitted it on there. So we've got seasonal variations in temperature involving the winter months, starting the engine and running it for 15 minutes before he drives it in order to melt the frost and ice on the windscreen. There's a few considerations in there, and I reckon it's easier to make sense of them on a graph. Okay, so up the side we've got kilometres per litre, and there we have his initial figure of 9.5 kilometres to the litre on his first trip, and that was up the hill from Tamworth to Glen Innes. Once he gets it to Glen Innes, fuel consumption's much worse, and after a month and a half, I reckon what happens there is he wakes up to himself and he decides that he's got to do something about this fuel consumption, and he starts driving more sensibly. So that's how we come to going from about 7.6 kilometres to the litre to 9.1. Then we have a discrepancy in the recording. We've either got 7.56 kilometres to the litre or 11.33 kilometres to the litre, or something somewhere in between. Here we have, is that 197 or 297 kilometres, because it's 26.08 litres. So my way of dealing with that is to graph it as suspect. If it was somewhere in the middle there, then we would wind up with 9.03, about 9.1, and then 8.9. So that's when I think young fella had a bit of an attack of driving gently. We've now got a trough down to 7 kilometres to the litre, and that's in February, so he's either had an attack of the silly leadfoots, or, and here's another possible explanation, he's an auto electrician. He quite often drives to vehicles which are stuck on the side of the road or bogged on a farm, fixes whatever their electrical problem is, and then jump starts sometimes very much larger vehicles using his own vehicle as a source of electricity. So sometimes these troughs down here out of season are caused by that, but the general picture is that he's lucky to get 8 kilometres to the litre in a fairly temperate season. That's December, January, February, March. Now here we had to go down the coast. What are we looking at in terms of 486 or 466 kilometres? Once again, we're having an argument, or I'm having an argument with his handwriting, but that gives us either 10.22 or 9.08 kilometres to the litre, and I've graphed it as the 10.22. Right? we'll give it the benefit of the doubt. There's some figures missing over here, and there's some figures missing over here. I don't know quite what happened there, but you know, I can't force a grown adult to write down his fuel consumption if he's not in the mood to, and you know, this is what long baselines are for. Here we're on the 1st of July, and 8.4 kilometres to the litre. I would say the battery is still benefiting from the long trip to the coast and back at that point, because by 22nd of July we're down into the 7.4, middle of August 7.5, end of August 7 kilometres to the litre. That's where the SunFoil got connected. This earlier yellow line here is where the SunFoil was fitted onto the car. I think the salient feature of these fuel burn figures, more or less stable, being a kilometre per litre below these more or less stable fuel burn figures, is that here he's not running the engine for 15 minutes in the morning to melt the frost off the windscreen because it's summertime, and here he is melting the frost off the windscreen. So we finally get on to his vehicle's response to having a SunFoil. For a month it got slightly better. In a fortnight it got dramatically better. Now in that fortnight, part 1, we're in October, so if you forget the fact that we had an inch of snow last Friday, he hasn't been having generally to do these 15-minute warm-up periods in the morning. He also has not, in that fortnight, jump-started any other vehicles. He also drove 150 kilometres west of here to Warialda and 150 kilometres back, so he's had a good 3-hour burn on the highway at cruising speed. So it's going to be interesting to see whether his fuel consumption comes back down here or whether it starts troggling off up along here. If it does, I predict it'll be a fairly slow improvement, and I say that because effectively the amount of electricity that diesels use at startup means they need the biggest solar panel you can fit on them. I put a 30 watt panel on his vehicle because I had a spare 30 watt panel in the shed. This morning he just rang me up and told me that he's measured a customer's diesel work truck. It's got a 24 volt electrical system and it needs 6 amps at 24 volts worth of solar panel using my formula, and that means that it really needs a 140 watt panel on the roof of the truck. Now I don't know of anybody who makes a 140 watt 24 volt solar panel, and if they do I don't know whether it'll fit on the roof of the truck. I did hear that there were some 120 watt 24 volt panels going fairly cheap because various Australian governments had policies where there was government assistance, sometimes paying half the cost of installation, for grid-connected solar electric systems mounted on the roof of houses. There was also a system where the government, well, the power providers were selling electricity for 35 cents a kilowatt hour, and they were going to pay $1.20 or $1.50 a kilowatt hour for grid-connected solar inverted power. So a lot of solar panels were shipped to Australia, and there's warehouses full of them, and when the government suddenly cut all their subsidies and dropped the price of solar grid connected power back to the same as coal-fired electric power, there was a sudden crunch in demand, and therefore there is a sudden oversupply, and thus and because 120 watt 24 volt solar panels, pretty much perfect for sticking on top of any large vehicle with a 24 volt electrical system, they're going fairly cheap. Hopefully it'll be a rectangle that fits on the roof of the cabin, and also hopefully when he's presented with the findings, the bloke who's just sniffing around the idea of being the first commercially fitted diesel SunFoil owner will decide that he wants to jump into the experiment and have a crack at it. The best I can say to him is whatever size solar panel you decide to put on your vehicle, it will improve the situation. I don't know whether he's going to go for the optimum, which would be a 140 watt. I don't know how you'd do that, a 270 watt 12 volt panel side by side, or like I said, a 120 watt single 24 volt panel taken from a house lighting system. So that's the news on the diesel SunFoil project. That's all the good news. There is a bit of sad news, because the Mark V is having a complete failure of the paint job. I did the paint job, my fault. The proximal cause is that I went to the hardware shop with a clear idea in my mind of what the colour of my son's car was, and I went up and down all of the various spray cans, and there was the expensive stuff, and there was the middle range stuff, and there was the El Cheapo, and bugger me, but the El Cheapo had the best colour match. And I looked at it, and on the can it said it's an oil-based paint for interior or exterior use, not recommended for automotive use. And I thought, well, maybe that means it's not so crash hot sticking on metal outside in the sun, getting heated up the way the outside surface of cars does. But because it was exterior and because it was oil-based, I thought it'd be worth trying. Well, big mistake, Warbles, big mistake. 3.5 months after going up on the roof of the car, the Mark V blue paint is cracked and split and peeling, coming off all over the place. When it first started to happen, I went in there and I sprayed some of this blue paint into the lid, and I used a touch-up brush to touch up the first little flecks where the paint was coming off. And that's where I learnt that I don't necessarily believe the story that it's an oil-based paint, even though that's what it says on the can, because it tells you to use turpentine, mineral turpentine, for the cleanup. And when I stuck the brush into the turpentine, instead of dissolving into the turpentine, like any other oil-based paint would do, this allegedly oil-based spray paint clotted and clumped. So that tells me that it's been mislabelled and sold under false pretences. It's a water-based paint, and that's why it's fallen off the SunFoil. So, even though I'm just starting to really enjoy the figures, I think I'm going to have to go in there and unbolt the Mark V and bring it home and sand the crappy paint off. I'll probably re-prime it, because I'm going to have to go through the old primer. The old primer was the mid-range paint. I didn't buy the expensive paint, but I bought the mid-range because it was the only grey primer I could find. And the primer's hung on. It's still there underneath this peeling blue mess. So yeah, I'm going to have to kind of interrupt the SunFoil Mark V battery resuscitation by a week. Only a week. I don't think it'll make too much of a difference to it, but you know, I've got to pull it off, got to sand it back, got to paint it grey and then blue with the proper paint, and then put it back up. So I figure that paint drying speed up here, it's probably going to be a week. However, at least we've discovered that pretty much my formula will work on a diesel if the solar panel will fit on the diesel. Ideally, I think my son's car needs an 80 or a 90 watt panel, and it's only got a 30 watt panel. So it's going to be a long, slow hoe to row before his battery finishes improving. May take more than 3 months. But, like I said, we've got some good figures. And as I said a couple of days ago on a different movie, the reason they invented highlight pens is so you can make your graphs comprehensible, because it takes a special sort of a head to look at a pile of figures like that and have any clear idea of what's going on. Oh, and here's the other thing. The global SunFoil movement is just that. It's a movement. It's apparently not a cult. Because for it to be a cult, I would have to have charismatic authority, and I really don't have that living in a lawn locker. I'd have to have influence over the thought processes of all of the people who are playing with SunFoils, and well, a little bit of influence, but I don't have any control over the thought processes. I can't force people to do stuff. If they want to fit a SunFoil, they will. If they want to fit a big one, they'll fit a big one. If they want to fit a little one, they'll fit a little one. If they want to streamline it, they'll streamline it. If they just want to bolt it on, they'll bolt it on. And I've got no control over forcing people to write down the figures. Some people will establish a baseline, some people won't. Some people will continue to measure it and find out what happens. Other people will just go with the flow and enjoy the extra torque. So I've got no charismatic authority, I've got a little bit of influence, I've got no control, and I can't isolate the members of the SunFoil movement. I can't stop you from thinking about other stuff that, you know, may cause you to not want to play the SunFoil game. I mean, I can't stop you from looking at advertising that tells you if you go and buy a brand new car with a smart charge alternator, it'll do things for you that a SunFoil won't. So we are officially not a cult. I'm apparently not a guru. Gu means darkness, ru means light. So to be a guru, a teacher or a leader has to bring people from darkness into light. I thought I was bordering on the edge of being a guru for a SunFoil cult spreading globally, but fella called Conference Report, particularly interesting YouTuber, he made a very good movie the other day explaining the 4 features of a cult. Charismatic authority, I don't have it. Influence, a little bit. Control, no, I don't have it. Ability to isolate, no, I haven't got that either. So 3 criterion out of 4 proves that the SunFoil movement is simply a do-it-yourself movement. It's not a cult. Isn't that nice? Ciao.